All right, welcome back, guys. After homecoming weekend, we proved that Nebraska might be frauds. Or is it just that maybe they were just this easy the whole time?
Yeah. Who would have thought that Indiana would be blowing out Nebraska 56-7? I don't think anyone coming into that game thought that. I mean, I think the whole Fox Noon crew, they all said Nebraska was going to win except for, I think one. I think it was Mark Ingram. But, yeah, Nebraska, they had a top 10 defense supposedly, not allowing any rushing touchdowns up to the point of playing Indiana, and Indiana scores 5 on them. Half of them came without our starting quarterback, Curtis Rourke, and Taven Jackson just took over completely and just kept the domination going on. But that was a big week for Indiana, and obviously in the AP poll, they moved up 3 spots, sitting at 7-0 and at the 13th spot.
Yeah, I think, honestly, going to Curtis Rourke's injury, I think that might be why we only moved up 3. I think we probably could have moved up maybe 2 more if Rourke was in the whole game, just because, they're probably since it's been confirmed that Rourke's not going to be playing Washington, I'm assuming the AP poll is thinking they're not going to have their starting quarterback. They might do worse. But, the way our offense looked the entirety of the game, I really don't think it's going to make that much more of a difference.
Yeah, and I think we saw flashes with Taven Jackson, too, and he went 7 for 8 for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was very efficient for the time that he got, and I think the domination that he was still able to carry over when Rourke got hurt, I think it's a good sign, especially with Washington coming up next week and College Game Day, which I don't know. When was the last time we even had it? It's been so long. I don't think we've even had it once. I don't know, but
I think this might be the first time.
I think it is.
I really that's I think what I saw. But if it's been here before, it's been a really long time.
Yeah, and I think it's really exciting for Hoosier fans because no one thought that Indiana would be 13th and 7-0 to start the first time since the 1960s that we've been 7-0. And I think College Game Day coming down, we got a big game versus Washington. Our starting quarterback's hurt. I think there's going to be a lot of fans and students that are really amped up. And, I'll be one of those fans. I'll be pulling an all-nighter Friday night to get to see College Game Day, which will be so sick. But, yeah, we got a big game ahead with Washington. And if we're able to pull that out, 8-0 is going to look really good in that AP top poll.
100%, especially if we're not going to have a starting quarterback like we've been talking about. If Jackson plays the same way that he played in that half that he was in against Nebraska, some of those throws that he was making were just absolutely insane. If he's doing that against Washington, I think Ohio State, even after the Nebraska game, I'm sure Ohio State, they are probably crapping their pants right about now, thinking, oh, crap, now we've got, not only do we have to play Penn State after playing Oregon, but now we have to play this IU team that's undefeated and has just been steamrolling every single team that they've been playing.
And yeah, now the Big Ten is kind of running the AP poll a little bit. We had Alabama drop to 15. They dropped 8 spots after losing to Tennessee. 3 out of the 4 top 4 spots are all Big Ten teams. Oregon moved up to 1, which I can completely agree with. And then you obviously have Georgia at 2 after just killing Texas, which I also agree with. Penn State and Ohio State, I think they could be flipped at 3 and 4, but you know what? It is what it is. Penn State's undefeated. Ohio State lost one, so it's fair where it is right now. But yeah, the Big Ten's getting really competitive now, and I think with Indiana kind of moving up a little bit there, they're kind of starting to creep up, and Ohio State's going to start getting a little nervous here. I think they have a shot against Ohio State. I don't think they're going to necessarily win. I think that'll be their sole loss, and we'll talk about it later, but I finally have Indiana on my playoff prediction, which I haven't had all year yet, even though we go to IU. I try to be a little unbiased, but yeah, and then obviously you had Michigan drop out, which is incredible. Illinois killed them 21-7, so Michigan's struggling big time. So the Big Ten's kind of flipping around, and so is the SEC. We can get into that after.
Kind of going into that too, with Big Ten teams, I think Illinois is a team that the AP poll might be sleeping on a little bit because, they're ranked 20th right now, but their only loss is to Penn State, and that was a really close game. So I think Illinois is another Big Ten team, really, that, we're going to have to watch throughout the course of the year. And I'm not entirely sure what the rest of their schedule has. I mean, just like with every Big Ten team, it gets more difficult as, the schedule and the season go on. But it looks like, they're playing Oregon next, like this weekend. I think that might be a trap game for Oregon. I'm not sure they're going to be prepared for Illinois, to be honest. I mean, Illinois is they're very aggressive. I mean, just after watching them play Michigan, they just ran the tables on them. And I was expecting that game to be closer as well. I mean, kind of like with IU Nebraska, I was expecting Illinois Michigan to be a bit closer, but Illinois just took it to them.
Well, I'll tell you too, just looking at Illinois' schedule, I mean, they've beaten 3 ranked teams. They beat 19th ranked Kansas in week 2. Then they beat Nebraska, who we just absolutely killed. And then they lost to Penn State 21-7, and then they just beat Michigan 21-7. So really, they only have one more ranked game in Oregon, which I don't think Oregon will really lose that. But especially going to Eugene and having to face the Ducks there, it's going to be a hard atmosphere. And then for the rest of the season, they don't play another ranked game. I mean, they have Minnesota, Michigan State, Rutgers, Northwestern. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs just because 2-loss team, and for just conference play in general, you already lost to Penn State. Now you have Oregon. It's going to be hard for them to kind of creep in. But Illinois, they've had a really good year, and I think we have to give them a lot of credit for that. And like you said, I'm glad you brought that up because Illinois, even though they're 20th, they are one of the better teams in the Big Ten, and coming up to it, we didn't really expect Illinois to be that high, and that's the same with Indiana. But yeah, Illinois has been creeping up, and we kind of forget all of the ranked wins they've had because just how fast they slid off. Nebraska, they're completely gone now. Kansas, they were up there. It's just there's been a lot of change, and I think Illinois, when they beat these teams, they've just kind of fell off, so everyone just kind of forgot about them. But yeah, Illinois, they're a great team, and like you said, it could be a trap game, but I don't necessarily believe that Oregon will lose this at home.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be close. I mean, I think Oregon will probably win, but I think it could be really, really close. At least definitely closer than you would expect it to be. I mean, just thinking back at the beginning of the year, I mean, kind of like Indiana, I don't think we were expecting to be ranked. But I mean, Illinois, there was not really a lot of talk about Illinois going into this year. So, I mean, the fact that they're even ranked is kind of a surprise. I think we probably should go. Did you watch the Iowa State game?
I did.
UCF? That was a little scary for a second. That was a little scary. I mean, they only won by 3. I mean, especially after West Virginia, it seemed like it was pretty easy going through with Iowa State, but they managed to hang on, and they moved down a spot after their win. Do you think they should have moved down a spot, or do you think they maybe should have stayed at 9?
I think it's deserving. I think Clemson, they've just been dominant all season. I think the thing that scares me about Clemson is the amount of points they're letting up, 31 against UVA. I don't really know, but they are putting up 50 bombs left and right. So I can see why Clemson's a 9. But I mean, we talk about Iowa State winning by 3. I mean, BYU only won by 3 too. So I think keeping Iowa State ahead of BYU, but keeping them like 10 and 11, I think that's fair. So I think I agree with what the committee poll did. But just quick about the Illinois thing again. If for IU fans, especially this game against Oregon, I think it's going to be huge that IU roots for Illinois, just because if they want to make the Big Ten championship, they're going to have to see Ohio State or Oregon lose a game, realistically, because I think Ohio State and Oregon could easily just win out, and that will keep IU out of the running for the Big Ten championship, even if they only lose one conference game. So if Illinois can fight Oregon here and pull out a win, then that'll be tremendously huge for IU, and that can give them a shot to get in, especially since they don't play Oregon at all this season.
Yeah, we are kind of lucky with not having to play Oregon and Ohio State in the same string of the schedule. I really do think that IU can beat Ohio State. like, I mean, we didn't really get the chance to see like Ohio State play, but I mean, there's been so much talk about like how IU has an easy schedule and how they haven't been tested and they're gonna fall to Nebraska. They haven't played a defense like Nebraska. All this negative talk, but that didn't really seem to be correct. You know, after the outcome of that game, where we just absolutely steamrolled them. So I think, I mean, just after especially, I mean, after a bye week, like momentum can change either like positively or stay the same, or it can be like really negative for some teams. Like some teams just, they come out of a bye week and it's like the fire they had at the first part of their schedule is just gone. But it seems like with this IU team, it's back, but it's like better than ever. And Nebraska was the hardest game that we've played this year, I think. I mean, we've talked about Nebraska's defense and how they have never let up a rushing touchdown. And we dropped 5 rushing touchdowns on their heads. Like, we picked off Dylan Raiola like
3 times.
3 times. And he's supposed to be the mini Patrick Mahomes, the mini GOAT. But our defense is just picking the plays apart and picking off Dylan Raiola.
It's going to be interesting, too, because next week, Ohio State does play Nebraska. So I'm curious to see how Ohio State does against Nebraska. I think they'll win, but I'm curious to see what the margin of victory would be for Ohio State, because beating them by 49 is going to be tough to beat, I think. So I'm curious to see how Ohio State does against Nebraska, and that can kind of be like a tell as to how close can IU maybe keep it with Ohio State based off of how they do against like a top 10 or a supposedly top 10 defense coming into next week.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be a huge indicator for what the Ohio State IU game is possibly going to look like, assuming that people don't get injured or like whoever, like if Ohio State doesn't have their starters in for the second half of the game, like we had some of our starters not in for whatever reason. Like it'll either way, give us some kind of indicator as to what that game is going to look like and whether or not IU, like how likely it will be for IU to win. I also kind of want to talk about the Georgia-Texas game, not to like randomly pivot, but when I watched that game, it was so hard to watch. I mean, I thought Texas was going to win hands down before going into that game. I mean, Georgia just hasn't really looked like themselves the past couple weeks. Like Texas has just dominated every single opponent that they've played, and it was at Texas too. So I mean, everything just looked like it was in Texas's favor, and then they lose by 15 points to Georgia.
And I'll tell you too, not only did they beat Texas, I think they beat the refs. You know, I don't know if you really saw, but the whole fan throwing water bottles, like trying to reverse that PI call, like that was unbelievable. And I think when you look at Alabama's win over Georgia, that was the biggest win of the year so far. Now Georgia has the biggest win of the game, or biggest win of the year so far over Texas. And yeah, like you said, Texas looked unstoppable. And coming into the game, like everyone thought Quinn Ewers, like, and Arch Manning, they were like the 1-2. Like if Quinn Ewers ever went down, Arch Manning could step up big. That they did end up doing that, and it's both just struggles completely. And I think Arch Manning did a little better trying to get them back into the game a little bit, but Georgia just manhandled them. And just keep in mind, like Carson Beck, he didn't even have that good of a game. Like he had 175 yards passing, 3 interceptions, no passing touchdowns. Like he didn't even play well. It was all ETN who had 87 yards and carries and 3 touchdowns. But yeah, Texas, they struggled. And I think for Georgia to go in and win this game, it's big for them, especially since now the committee can go look at their schedule and see that they have not only beaten Clemson 34-3 at the very beginning of the season, they beat the number 1 team in the nation, probably one of the most dominant number 1 teams so far this year in the nation, Texas 30-15. So I think it's really big. And now their only 2 other ranked games are Ole Miss, who's been obviously struggling heavily recently, and then hosting Tennessee, which we can get into later about them beating Alabama and kind of just taking their spot.
Yeah, I think the key to Georgia winning that game against Texas was their defense. I mean, like you said, like Carson Beck did not play well at all. He threw three, like you said, he threw 3 picks and he had less than 200 yards, which I think in a way speaks to how good the defense did because, I mean, considering they scored 30 points and he had less than 200 yards, like if you didn't watch the game, that should tell you that like Georgia's defense was giving their offense good field position. Like in the first half, like they would only have to drive like 30 yards or 40 yards or like just half the distance of the field because of the great job that their defense was doing. And then they would score because ETN would run the ball and Texas's defense could not stop. They just could not stop him from getting to the end zone. But Texas, I mean, I think we kind of got to see their kryptonite a little bit. I mean, their quarterbacks are great, but Georgia kind of exposed that they're not the best when it comes to like playing out of system or out of the pocket. Like their pass rush, they had no time to look around to see what was going on. And I think like that's why a team like Alabama was able to beat Georgia because, I mean, Jalen Milroe, like he played horrible against Tennessee like on Saturday. But when he played Georgia, he was able to like run out of the pocket quick and make big plays to like he would just do runs. Like he would run and then that would allow him to throw the deep ball. But Texas just wasn't really able to do that. I mean, neither of their quarterbacks are really known for doing either of those things. So, I mean, it really speaks to Texas kryptonite. Like all you have to do is just take away the time that the quarterbacks have to look down the pocket. Because Quinn Ewers, I know he loves the deep ball. He loves throwing that deep ball. But if you take away the time, then that Texas team is a lot more beatable. But it's really hard to execute that plan. Like Georgia has the players to execute that game plan. Not everyone has those players. So, I mean, we could see Texas lose another game if someone else is somehow able to execute this plan, but I'm not sure.
And just looking at the standings for the SEC, like they have 9 ranked teams this week. And I'm not going to like transfer over just yet because I kind of want to get into like another team in the SEC, but Vandy has kind of come up into the top 25 now, and Army and Navy are sitting at 23-24. But yeah, Vandy's come up, which makes them the 9th team in the SEC to be ranked. But one team that, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but kind of in the front running a little bit is Texas A&M. You know, Texas A&M, they're the only 4-0 team in the SEC right now in conference play. And their next game is at home versus LSU. And I think, you know, I really think A&M can pull this out. It's going to be tough, but I mean, at home, I think there's a big shot that they can do it. Like, I mean, they killed number 9 Missouri 41-10, which also is a big in-conference win. So I think they can pull this one out. And besides that, they don't have any other ranked games except for at home again versus Texas, which obviously that's going to be a tough game, but they can afford to lose one game if they do beat LSU. So I think A&M, they have a really good shot at doing something in the SEC, especially if they beat LSU.
Yeah, and maybe even sneaking into the playoffs if they end up making it into the SEC championship. Because, I mean, they're undefeated in conference play. This weekend, they're going up against the other team that's undefeated in the SEC, in LSU. And if Texas A&M wins that game, they definitely can afford to take that one loss because, I mean, Alabama's already lost twice. Tennessee, I mean, they're bound to lose again. Who do they play next week?
Tennessee has a bye week next week.
Oh, yeah, they have a bye week next week, but the next team that they play is Kentucky, which is a very strong defensive team. So we could very well see Tennessee lose that game. Even though their offense kind of had a little bit of spark in the second half against Alabama, I'm just not sure if that's going to last. because I mean, both Tennessee and Alabama played really bad in that game. Like, I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit last week about how it was going to be a shootout between two teams that were kind of falling off a bit after the beginning of the year and the hype that they had. And I mean, with Alabama, the game that they won against Georgia. But yeah, I mean, we could very well see Texas A&M in the SEC championship, and assuming Texas wins out in the rest of their games, we could have an SEC championship that is just Texas.
Yeah, that would be really cool to see. And yeah, it's like to your point about like the whole Tennessee Alabama game, like even though it was not as good of a game as we thought it was going to be in terms of like scoring, but I'll give credit to Tennessee to pull that out just in general, because I think knowing what was on the line, and I said it last week too, like if you win, you'll kind of not secure a spot, but you'll have a spot in the polls like this week, but you're kicking the other team out. And to see just like IU ranked above Alabama, it's just like, am I like reading this right? Like it's just different. Like no one would have thought that. But to see Tennessee up at 7 now, replacing Alabama, it's good to see that Tennessee is kind of just like making their jump, and like looking at their schedule too, like they only have Georgia and Vandy left to round out 2 out of their last 3 games of the season, and they have Kentucky and Mississippi State, which should be wins, and then in between the Georgia and Vandy game, they have UTEP. So I think for Tennessee, this can be a very doable way to like kind of get them into the playoffs. I mean, I think the game they have to win is the Georgia game. I mean, that's going to be a hard game to win, especially going to Georgia and trying to play them, and like with the atmosphere and the momentum they're kind of riding with who they've beaten up to that point. But yeah, it's gonna be a tough atmosphere to play in, and I think Tennessee just getting that Alabama win is just it's just huge, because they got 2 more hard ranked games against one really hot team in Vandy that's just all of a sudden kind of exploded into the committee poll, and then Georgia, who's always been phenomenal, but they've kind of rode the wave and have taken over completely. But for Alabama now, like on the other side, like they have Missouri and LSU to go, and then they have Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn. But Alabama, they're now on the chopping block, and I don't think now they're going to make the playoffs, even if they do win out. But hosting Missouri as the 15 seed and they're the 21, like that's going to be another big game. And I think if Missouri does end up pulling that out, Alabama, I don't know if they're even going to be in the poll anymore. I think if not, I think they may be in like the 20s or like maybe like low teens, whatever. But like I don't know. I don't see Alabama stay. I don't think they deserve to be in the poll if they do lose in Missouri. I mean, we saw what happened to Michigan. Like they're completely out now after being a 3-loss team.
Finally.
Yeah, they deserve to be out. But it's going to be tough for Alabama, and I think if you're going to Alabama to just be like a football fan, like this was not a good season for you. Like, I don't know. Alabama's on the chopping block.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Especially the way that they've been looking. I mean, not even just looking at the record, just they look so sloppy. I mean, their defense was the first thing to fall apart after the Georgia game, and now their offense, they're just making all kinds of mistakes. Jalen Milroe just having turnovers at every single wrong time. Like just whenever you don't want to have a turnover, you see a Jalen Milroe interception. And I mean, I think Alabama could very well be just completely off. I don't think they will, just because I feel like Alabama kind of gets favorable treatment, kind of like Michigan does. I mean, Michigan has a reason to have favorable treatment because they won the national championship last year and all that, but they have a completely different team. So it's not entirely justified. But Alabama always just gets the treatment they do simply because they're Alabama. That's it. Like, it's always just assumed that they're going to have an insanely talented roster, which I'm not saying they don't, but it's just not measuring up to all these other teams that are above them. And I mean, even below them, too, I mean, just below them is Kansas State, who is finally looking like they're back now. After that win against West Virginia. You've got Boise State, who, again, they have Ashton Genty, Heisman candidate running back. They played a close game against Oregon. They've looked good all year long. You've got 2-loss Ole Miss, who's below them, which Alabama's probably better than them. But then you've got Pitt and Illinois, which I think Alabama could easily just fall if they lose to Missouri, just because 4 out of those 5 teams that are below Alabama are looking really good. So we could see Alabama in that 25 spot to Vandy, or like Vandy is.
Yeah, and I think for Vandy, I don't know. I mean, this may be their 1 week of fame, I think, because now they play Texas. And their win against Ball State was kind of scary, I'm not going to lie. Only winning by 10, 24-14.
To Ball State.
Yeah, it's not a good win. And I'm surprised that they kind of got ranked. And I think if Nebraska were to beat IU, I think Nebraska would have been up there instead of Vandy. But yeah, it's this game against Texas. I think if they don't lose by a good amount of points, I think that's the best way to put it. I think Vandy's going to be dropped out too. And I don't know. I think when you look at the other teams that are receiving votes, there's honestly not many. Usually you would see a big list, but now that we're kind of getting into the most important part of the season, you don't see that. But Washington State, they've got the most with 46, and then obviously Syracuse, they've got a huge game versus Pitt. So if they want to kind of make some noise in the top 25, that's the game that they have to win. And honestly, that was one of the 3 games that I kind of look at and say, this is the one that's going to impact the rankings the most, because I think Pitt, who's undefeated right now, they have to pull this out, because the ACC, they're trying to keep up with Miami and Clemson. And I don't really want to kind of transfer it over. I mean, unless you want to go, but Pitt, they've looked solid. And I think their win again, and they're coming off a bye week too, because 2 weeks ago they beat Cal. So it's just their margin for victory has been close the past couple of weeks. With North Carolina, they only won by 10. Cal, they won by 2. I'm curious to see what they can do at home versus the Orange. So it's going to be interesting, because then they have SMU and then Clemson later in their schedule. So it's going to be a big tell as to whether Pitt is a contender or pretender, because even though they are undefeated 6-0, the wins that they've gotten have been very sketchy. They've had 3 one-possession games, 4 decided by 10 or less. Cincinnati by 1, West Virginia by 4, and UNC by 10, and Cal by 2.
Yeah, kind of speaking on SMU, I don't know what it is with teams that beat Stanford by 30-plus points and moving down why does the AP poll hate it when teams beat Stanford? Because Notre Dame last week beat Stanford by 30-plus points, and then they moved down a spot. And now this week it happens with SMU. They moved down a spot after crushing Stanford 40-10. But SMU, SMU and Pitt, they're going to be dark horses this year. I kind of hope Pitt wins out the remainder of their schedule. I think that would be something fun to watch for sure. They've been looking really good. Moving up a spot during a bye week, I think says a lot about a team for sure. And that game against Syracuse, Syracuse, they only have 1 loss. So that game could have serious implications for either team. It would give Pitt a much smaller chance of making it into the ACC championship, because they're like Miami and Clemson, they're also undefeated, so they still have they just really need Miami or Clemson to slip up, and then that next spot is theirs. So Pitt, I don't think, can really afford to slip up against Syracuse. But Syracuse, they're a pretty solid team this year, and they like you said, they received the second most amount of AP votes, and this could be their chance to get into the rankings and climb further in the ACC standings, and to even play spoiler to a couple of teams that Syracuse is going to play later on this year.
And also just looking at the rankings in general, and you talk about SMU dropping down a spot, honestly, I said last week about Notre Dame, it was just why, but I think this week it's kind of a valid choice, just because Illinois, they beat a ranked team. So I don't think moving them up just one spot is deserving. So I think bumping them up too is I think that's pretty fair. So I kind of agree with why SMU was dropped one, but yeah, it's a weird coincidence that beating Stanford is a crazy like, oh no, we have to drop you. Like it's just kind of odd. But I kind of want to just talk because we kind of briefly said like Iowa State BYU, but I kind of want to like move it in a little bit to the Big 12 because I kind of find the Big 12 very interesting now just because of what the whole conference is kind of setting them up as. And we talked about like the ACC and how we can kind of picture our ACC matchup for the championship. And I think BYU, I think the Big 12, I think they're starting to shape it out as well. Like you've kind of rounded it out to 3 teams, BYU, Iowa State, and Kansas State. Like obviously we had Colorado in the mix there. They won, but they're kind of slowly to slide. But it looks like BYU, Iowa State, and Kansas State are starting to run away with that. And I think Iowa State and BYU, they both had scare games this week with BYU beating Oklahoma State 38-35, and then Iowa State beating UCF 38-35. Weirdly, same score. But then you had Kansas State, who put up 45 on West Virginia, beating them by 27. And we kind of talked about how West Virginia, they were kind of like a dark horse team to play spoiler against these top 3 teams in the Big 12, but Kansas State, they kind of just blew them out of the water. And now they have an unranked game versus Kansas. So they've kind of got a nice little breather there because Kansas, I mean, they were ranked earlier in the season, but they just haven't performed recently. But for like BYU, I'll tell you, like UCF, like that's going to be, I don't know. I think that could be a trap game there. And I think going to UCF, it's going to be a tough place to play. And they know that they have the 2 top teams in the Big 12 back to back, and they were barely able, or they just missed squeezing out one over the 10th best team in the country. But now they have a chance to do it to the 11th best team in the country, BYU. So I think UCF, they're coming in with a more like grinded out mentality, and I think they can sneak one out over BYU and kind of give Kansas State a shot to kind of move up.
Yeah, I mean, if they are able to pull out against BYU, that would drastically change the standings of not only the Big 12 but the AP poll, because BYU, I mean, they're ranked 11th right now. Like that's huge, and then losing to an unranked team, I mean, in conference, but still unranked, that's going to move them down a lot. And I mean, we've seen teams move down a lot. I mean, earlier this year, Missouri moved down like 12 spots after losing to Texas A&M, who was also ranked that year. So I mean, we could see some big movement on the AP poll if BYU was to lose that game. I think a team that's kind of weirdly in the rankings right now for the Big 12 is Cincinnati. They're just like Colorado, Texas Tech, and Kansas State. They're also 3-1 in the conference. They just came off a pretty big win against Arizona State on Saturday. Cincinnati has looked. This is probably the best Cincinnati has looked since being in the playoffs in 2021, I think. And they could very well make some noise. I mean, Cincinnati, the rest of their schedule, they play Colorado. That's going to have some huge implications for the Big 12 rankings because they both have the same record. They go up against West Virginia, dark horse. Then they play Iowa State and Kansas State back to back, both ranked. And then they play TCU, which I mean I think they should beat TCU at the end of the year. But that 2-game stretch from November 16th and November 23rd, those could very well be trap games for Iowa State and Kansas State. And that could allow Cincy to kind of squeeze in to the Big 12 championship if other teams above them were to slip up that they are not going to play.
And I'll like tell you too, like with Cincinnati, like ASU, they were a hot team coming in. Like Utah, they were a really good team when they played ASU, and ASU, they pulled that out really well. And I think there was a lot of backlash towards the committee because I also have friends at ASU, but there was a lot of like just backlash towards them saying that ASU should be ranked. And I think coming into this week, they had a lot. Not this week, yeah, last week they had a lot of votes to be ranked, and they obviously didn't get it because they got beat by Cincinnati. And I think Cincinnati, they got one of the rougher schedules, I think, in the Big 12, which is why, like, even though they're looking decent now, not only do they have like one of the worst schedules in the Big 12 for the rest of the year, but they've already lost 2 games, like both to unranked teams, Pitt and Texas Tech. And even though they were close, losses are losses and wins are wins. So I don't know. You gotta have to pull it out in some way. But like Iowa State and Kansas State, 2 of the top 3 teams of the Big 12, and then Colorado, who it's just like Colorado. They're really good. The atmosphere there, like that's their Halloween game. Like it's gonna go crazy there. And then obviously West Virginia, who has just been a nightmare for these teams in the Big 12 who have been trying to make some noise. And West Virginia, even though they're not really up there on the standings, they're sitting 3 and 4. They've been that team that can upset these top teams in the Big 12, and I think we've kind of noticed that with their schedule. And like although they haven't been able to like pull out the wins, they've been kind of keeping it close a little bit. Like they lost to Pitt 38-34, and then Iowa State 20-16, and obviously they got blown out by Kansas State. But for Iowa State and Pitt, they were able to kind of force them to like I don't know, like go to like their normal standards just because of how great West Virginia has played. But I don't know. I think West Virginia at home, that's gonna be a tough game for Cincinnati. And I just think in general, Cincinnati is gonna have a rough time trying to finish out their schedule.
Yeah, they have we've talked about it already. Like they have a big schedule, but if they were to win like 2 of those games, especially if it was against any of the ranked games, Iowa State or Kansas State, that could really like have some huge implications to the rankings within Big 12 and AP poll. BYU's kind of lucky they don't have to play, or I guess really I should say Cincinnati's lucky they don't have to play BYU just because of the teams they already have to play. But I kind of want to go back to the ACC for a second because I was just thinking about a point that you were making about like Clemson's defense allowing 31 to UVA. Miami's defense, the past few weeks, they've just been allowing teams to hang with them, like hang with their offense. Louisville like was ranked at one point. So, it's a little bit different. But Louisville dropped 45 on Miami. And that's not the only time that this has happened earlier this year either. They played Virginia Tech. That was within 4 points. They're not ranked. Cal, not ranked, 1 point game. They let Cal score 38 points on them. Like ever since the start of the year after Florida, or I guess the last time they truly dominated an opponent was South Florida. These past 3 games for Miami have been close. And I'm wondering, with their defense, what are they doing wrong that are allowing teams to just kind of hang around every single week up until this, since the Virginia Tech game?
I just think Miami, just looking at their schedule too, and obviously we talk about their defense and just how they've been struggling. Yeah, they've been struggling, and I think Clemson has too. But I think until I see a Miami loss, I can't really say that they're the second best team in the ACC. Although they don't have any ranked games this year, which is why a lot of people are calling them frauds, and that's why they've been calling IU frauds as well. But for Miami, it's just I don't know. Miami, they've been getting really close games. It's kind of concerning. And I think going into the playoffs in general, because I don't really see them losing a game, except maybe at Syracuse as their last game. But I don't really see them losing. And I think keeping them in that 6th spot, I think I think that's just where they're going to hang around all season unless they lose. And I think if they do lose a game, they are going to drop tremendously just because looking back at all the results and just kind of seeing like how many one possession games there have been. And obviously now they have Florida State, like a really struggling Florida State team who obviously just hasn't performed to expectations whatsoever. But it's just, I don't know. I think Miami's been struggling. And until Miami loses, I don't see Clemson ever really jumping ahead of them just because of the record just in general. Like Miami's 7-0, Clemson 6-1. So I think just, I don't know. Miami is playing that tight rope game. So I don't know. And obviously I think there's two games that I could see Miami losing. One of them is Duke because Duke has been on fire to start the season, like 6-1. They just beat Florida State 23-16, but they're now at home versus SMU, and then they go to Miami. So those back-to-back games against two ranked teams, and ACC teams, it's going to be rough for them, but I think they know what's kind of on the line and everything that Miami has been doing as a team so far and just like how they've been winning games, to say the least. But Duke, I think, can go in there and just completely upset them, or Syracuse, who just has Kyle McCord and the way he's been playing. Like, I think he can kind of maybe host them and just beat them too. Like, they had the win against UNLV when they were ranked. So Syracuse, like, don't count them out just yet because obviously they can maybe make a jump. And obviously too, like, Miami or Clemson loses a conference game, like, there could be other spots for other teams to jump up there, like SMU or Pitt. But obviously Pitt has a tougher game this week against Syracuse, which we've talked about. But I think there's a lot of room in the ACC, but I think for right now it's kind of distinctive as to what that final matchup can be, because Miami has no more ranked matchups and Clemson is just obviously like just a football juggernaut. So it's going to be interesting.
I mean, I think kind of speaking on Miami's schedule, I do agree that Duke and Syracuse are definitely games that Miami could lose. I think a couple other games that they probably should look out for. Florida State, I mean, like you said, like they have only won once. But in a way, like, because this is a rivalry game, Florida State is desperate to win. And I think with Duke coming up next week, clearly being the tougher game, Miami could very well overlook Florida State, and that could lead to Florida State eking out a win. But Georgia Tech, they were ranked at the beginning of the year, and they played Notre Dame on Saturday, and they kind of contained Notre Dame's offense despite what the score says. A lot of the points from that game came from Notre Dame's defense. So I think with Georgia Tech's defense going up against Miami's offense, that could also be a really close game that maybe Miami slips up, makes a mistake, and could lose to Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I think even though they have a whole schedule of unranked games, I think a lot of those unranked teams are good teams. Like, and you've mentioned them, and I just think, just in general, the ACC, I wouldn't say it's wide open, but I think there could be a lot of room for movement, and I think that's kind of a similar thing we've been talking about for the rest of the other conferences, especially with the SEC, which is just wide open to anyone really. And then the Big Ten, which if like one team like IU, Penn State, Oregon, or Ohio State slip up, then that can kind of just make a play for another Big Ten team to kind of slide into that Big Ten championship spot. And then we just talked about the SEC, the Big 12, and like the Big 3 in the Big 12, Iowa State, Kansas State, and BYU. If one of them slips up, that kind of just like leads the way for the other two to kind of have like a walk into the Big 12 championship. Like everything is just like wide open. Like, and I'll kind of just like open this up like broadly, like looking at the top 25, like there's still so much room for movement. And with like 5 games left in the season, like anything can really happen. So I think by the end of this, where teams are currently, like the only teams I feel confident in and like where they are and if they can stay there, I'm confident with Oregon. and I'm confident with Texas. Those are really the only two teams that I can and Miami, I guess, just because I don't know. I think Miami can win out easily, but I think those are the only three teams I feel confident that they can kind of stay like in the range of where they are. Like everyone else, I feel like there's wide open. Like everywhere else, like they can move extremely high, extremely low. I don't think anything is really safe for any of the other 22 teams I didn't mention. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. And there's a lot of ranked games this week, including like the Missouri-Alabama game, 21-15. You have the 12-24 game, Notre Dame-Navy, which that's going to be a big game for IU because Notre Dame's ranked right above them. So if Navy does win that, then IU is going to move ahead of Notre Dame if they beat Washington, of course. Then you have LSU, Texas A&M, which is 8-14, 5-25 in Texas and Vandy, 1-20 in Oregon and Illinois. Like everything is wide open, and I think this week is gonna tell a lot for these ranked teams to see where they end up going for the Week 10 rankings or for Week 9.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of good ranked games this weekend that are gonna be moving stuff around in the AP poll. There are some other games, though, I think that could at least change the standings of like some of these other conferences, like with the ACC, like Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. Like if Georgia Tech wants any shot at the ACC, they're going to have to beat Virginia Tech. They're going to have to play Miami later on this year. And if they want a chance to jump Miami into the ACC championship, Virginia Tech is one of those games that they're going to have to win, even though it's not ranked. Ole Miss, they're playing Oklahoma, and Oklahoma has low-key looked like a complete dumpster fire the past few weeks. But this is a must-win game for Ole Miss, and they could very easily slip up, and that could effectively boot Ole Miss out of the top 25. Arkansas, Mississippi State, that's kind of bottom of the barrel SEC teams, but both have kind of made noise in that conference and beating respective teams. Arkansas beating Tennessee, Mississippi State kind of keeping it very close with teams like Georgia when no one would expect them to. Oklahoma State, Baylor. Baylor's kind of in the is somewhere in the Big 12 standings, kind of closer to the top. No, they're like towards the bottom. They're 1-3 right now, but they've had some very close games, and I think that could be a very fun game to watch because, especially after how Oklahoma State played against BYU and how close that was, and BYU being a top Big 12 team in that conference, that could very well be a crazy game. And then you've got a little reunion between a new ACC team that's used to be on the Pac-12 and a still member of the Pac-12 in Oregon State versus Cal, which could be just a fun game to watch since it's they used to play each other all the time. They still do get to play each other this weekend, so it could be a very interesting game to watch, just simply because they used to be in conference. Like it used to be an in-conference game. Now it's just a regular season football game that doesn't really have any implications on their conference rankings. It would just more impact their overall ranking.
And I think one more game too before we can maybe get into like our playoff prediction for the college football playoffs. But I think one other game that is just a big game in the Big Ten. It's honestly it's gonna be Michigan State, Michigan. I think obviously Michigan's been struggling recently, and just the rivalry between Michigan State, Michigan is obviously ginormous as they play their yearly game against each other. But I think Michigan State, they have a chance to pull that out. And obviously Michigan State, they've been struggling recently in the Big Ten. They haven't really been talked about. Like they've had games against like Prairie View, which just, I don't know, like 40-0 they won. But they've had games against BC where they lost 23-19. That's when I think BC was ranked at that point. Ohio State, they lost 38-7. Oregon, they lost 31-10. Like they've had, even though their record says 4-3, they've had two really tough games, and they've they've played the two hardest teams in the Big Ten, and obviously going in, like, you don't really expect them to win, which is completely fine. So if you replace those games with other Big Ten teams that aren't ranked, I think they can easily be like 6-1, maybe 5-2. But when you're setting up to play like these harder games earlier in the season, it kind of makes Michigan State look like a bad team. So they just beat Iowa 32-20. But I think this Michigan game, I think this can be a huge game, and I think this can obviously Michigan's are already struggling like enough, but this can just completely wipe the floor with them now if Michigan State's able to pull that out. And obviously the rivalry between Michigan State and Michigan is just ginormous, and the crowds go crazy, and it's at Michigan, so it's going to be hard for Michigan State to kind of pull that out. But I think that can just be a big game for fans just to like kind of just like watch and just see how it all plays out. But obviously both these teams, they don't really have a chance at the Big Ten standings this year.
Yeah, no, that would just be more of like a fun rivalry game to watch. But kind of before we do the 12-team playoff, I mean, just because we talked about Michigan State, I'm looking at their schedule right now, and they low-key have one of the nastiest 3-game stretches. They play Michigan, obviously, this coming Saturday, and then they host IU, the number 13th ranked team. Go Hoosiers! Next, and that's a trophy game. That's also a rivalry game for them as well. And then after that, they have a bye week, but then they have Illinois in that next game, which that's just crazy to have a 3-game. I think that's just crazy to have a 3-game stretch like that at the end of the schedule after playing the teams that they've played at the beginning of the year that are not easy teams to play.
Yeah, I think that'll just be like you said, just like a fun game. But do you want to start with the playoff predictions, or?
Yeah, we can start with. I can go first for the
ahead.
playoff predictions. I mean, I have. I kind of switched it around a little bit because of the Texas Georgia loss. At least like with which conference is in that number 1 spot, and I have Oregon in that number 1 spot. I have the Big Ten in that number 1 spot right now. So I have Oregon first. I moved Texas down to 2. Because even though they lost to Georgia, I still think they're probably going to win the the SEC. Especially if if they go against Texas A&M, that's a team that like they match up better against than Georgia. Miami, I still have at 3, and BYU, I still have at 4. They haven't really given me any reasons to move them down. I mean, even though I've been kind of talking down Miami a little bit, it's more just because I'm worried about their defense and how it'll hold up with the remainder of their schedule. Because, I mean, we did talk about the tough games that they have later on. Then I have Penn State at 5, Ohio State at 6. That didn't change. I moved Clemson up to 7. And then I also moved Indiana up to 8. So both Clemson and Indiana move up a couple of spots there. I moved Georgia back into my rankings. I have them in at number 9 after that win they had against Texas. If their defense plays like that, I think they could very well sneak into the playoffs, probably get a lower seed, like 9 through 11. I have LSU at 10. Assuming they beat Texas A&M, I think they could very well hold on to that spot next week, or I guess this weekend. If Texas A&M wins, I'm probably going to move Texas A&M into LSU spot. I have Iowa State at 11. The game against UCF was a little bit scary, so I had to move them down a little bit. And Boise State is still at 12. I mean, they had a bye week, so there was no real reason to move them out of that spot.
So in mine, I don't have BYU in it at all.
Oh.
Yeah. It's a little interesting. So I have Oregon at 1, which, yeah. I have Texas at 2, which I completely agree. Miami at 3 for the ACC. Then Iowa State at the 4. At the 5, I have Penn State. Then Ohio State at 6. Then I have Georgia at 7, LSU at 8, Tennessee 9, Clemson 10, Indiana 11, and then Boise State at 12. It's interesting, but I honestly, like, anything can just change completely. So I kind of just like threw something like randomly together. But obviously BYU, they can win the Big 12. So I don't know. It'll just be all interesting. I don't think BYU is going to hold up, though. That's my prediction. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that game could have just been like a 1-game scare where, like, they were like just not paying attention to UCF. But we'll find out this weekend. Also, I would just like to go on record and say that I've had Indiana in my 12-team playoff since we started. So if I just wanted to put that out there just because, I had faith in our Hoosiers. I had faith when pretty much every single network has just been like low-key clowning us for no reason at all whatsoever. Like, they've been going off on us for winning. Like, okay,
now there's no reason to clown us, though. We are legit now.
We're legit now.
Totally legit. So,
I mean, we're 13th right now in the AP poll and the coaches poll. So, if that doesn't mean that we're legit, I don't know what does. Like, seriously,
let's go out there and beat Washington with Taven Jackson. Let's go do that.
Yes.
Let's go 8-0. Let's go start 8-0 for the first time since I don't even know anymore. I mean, like
I think
feel
it's
like the
still
records
1967.
Is it? Yeah, the records I feel like just keep piling up. It's like, oh yeah, Indiana broke the record for starting 8-0, like for the first time in their history. Like, I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff going on now for Indiana, but yeah, no, I think let's go out there, beat Washington with Taven Jackson, go enjoy college game day. That's gonna be really fun Friday and Saturday. I think Pat McAfee coming back to his home state, I think it's going to be great. I think Indiana, I think the Rock's going to be packed out. I think everyone's going to be rocking out. It's going to be great. And I think in general, I think Indiana, they're looking for a spark. I mean, well, not a spark anymore. They're looking for like a house fire now. Like they're ready to go. And we
need some more gasoline.
Literally, like they're looking for like the big bucks now. And I think with a win here, I think they got a bye week. Yeah, they got a bye week after Washington, and then they got Michigan State, then Michigan, which I think can be easier games to play than Nebraska and Washington, and then obviously Ohio State, which whatever, and then Purdue, which we're going to beat the brakes off them. So go IU, and I think this could be the year.
Yeah, I really want to see us drop 50 on Washington's head. I think that, we just did it to Nebraska. Why not Washington, right? We've pretty much been doing that this entire year. It really does not matter who we play. We're gonna drop 50 on your head. We are. I think it's been. I don't think we've scored less than 40 points in any game this year.
We scored 31 against FIU, unfortunately. 31-7.
Wait, was it really?
Yeah, it was. That's what I said. I was like, we put up 31 on FIU, but 56 on Nebraska. I don't really get how that makes sense, but yeah, it did happen. Week 1, 31-7. I remember that game. I don't know how I remember that.
Oh yeah, that was dang. Yeah, but ever since then, we've just been dropping 40 or more. We dropped 77 on Western Illinois. I mean, that was no surprise there. But 42 on UCLA, 52 on Charlotte, 42 on Maryland, 41 on Northwestern, and now 56 on Nebraska. And just speaking of which, that's the second most amount of points that we've dropped on an opposing team's defense this entire year. Obviously, Western Illinois, 77, but that's the highest amount of points that we've scored since Western Illinois.
And I'll tell you, too, just kind of looking at quick stats quickly on my phone, Indiana, they have the most points per game out of any college football team right now. They're averaging 48.7. Miami's second with 48.3. And they also lead the CFB in touchdowns scored. They have 47 total. Miami's also at second with 44. Try and guess who's third. I'm curious what you say. 'Cause I didn't think they would be up here, but
let's see. Third. Well, you said Miami had 44, I think, right?
Third has 39.
Oh. Can I get a hit on the conference? Is it a Big Ten team or is it a
It's not. See, I
SEC?
think this will give it away then. It's not Big Ten or SEC.
Oh. Okay, so then it might be. It's either ACC or yeah.
It doesn't necessarily
Big
mean
12.
it's a Power 4 team.
Wait a minute. Oh, you know what? I think I might know. Hold up. I think, is it Army?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say, because I'm I know Army also because just like us, Army has not trailed at all.
I know. Bryson Daly
Like-
has been a stud recently, and he played tremendously last week. But yeah, it's crazy that Indiana is ranked first in 2 offensive categories. Like, no one would have thought that. And like, they're third in yards per play. Like, they're 11th in passing yards per game. Like, it's just nuts how well they're playing. And I think coming into this week against Washington, it's going to be interesting to see how Taven Jackson can kind of carry Curtis Rourke's fire over and just keep it going while he's out. And hopefully that the bye week after, and the bye week's going to be a perfect placement for them, that the bye week can kind of give Rourke a little bit more rest. And then when he's ready against Michigan State, he can come back here, roll both Michigan teams, put up a fight against Ohio State, and then kill Purdue.
Yes, that Purdue game is going to be so fun to watch. If that's not sold out with only IU people in those stands, I don't know what's going to happen, because I've been, like, my sophomore year, because, I mean, obviously, like, IU and Purdue, like, whenever you play, like, in conference games, like, you switch every other year, like, the other team hosts or whatever. My sophomore year, we hosted Purdue. There was more Purdue people in the stands than there was IU fans. This year,
It's going to be the opposite.
it's going to be the complete opposite, and I cannot wait to see it. It's going to be electric. Even though, like, Purdue's, like, bottom tier right now, like,
Just beating the brakes off them is going to be so fun.
just simply because it's Purdue. That's it. Like, just because it's Purdue, it's going to be sold out, and everyone's going to just watch their complete and utter demise by IU if they haven't faced their demise already.
Yeah, and I think Oregon already kind of started the beat down on them, and I was watching the game, Oregon-Purdue. That was just ugly by just Purdue in general.
There was no one in the stands.
There was no one. Wasn't it like, what, 35-0? Like, that was unbelievable. Like, at least put up something against them. Like, I hope we can do that and maybe double the amount of points that Oregon had. But yeah, it's gonna be great. And I think IU just in general, like, they're on the come up, and when we start basketball, that's going to be great. Like, we're actually the only Big Ten team that's ranked in football and basketball, which I would have never thought that coming in because of just how good.
And women's basketball.
And women's basketball. And soccer now, too. We're
Yeah.
ranked in soccer. So IU is a sports university, and we're starting to make a big come up on football. So I'm excited to see how the rest of the season plays out and how College Game Day is in general. And next week when we talk about it in general, hopefully everything is going to be great. IU's going to be 8-0. They're going to move up in the standings. Curtis Rourke's going to come back healthy, and we get a nice little bye week.
If we go into, I'm going to be so happy if we go into the top 10 next week, if we beat Washington. I mean, if we don't, I'm like, that'll be so sad. But I think we will. I mean, especially if Taven plays the way that he was, like, it against Nebraska. I mean, we didn't really get to see him throw the ball a lot, but we didn't really have to, just because our run game was just unstoppable. Nebraska had no answer for it. But from the flashes that we did see from Taven after Rourke left the game, I think there's a high chance that we pretty much do the same thing against Washington, especially since it's here. I mean, I don't think we're sold out yet for this Washington game, but I imagine probably by either Wednesday or Thursday that tickets are sold out. I mean, especially since College Game Day is coming to town. Like, come on, we have to sell at the stadium now, guys. We have to sell it out. There's no other option. I mean, we can't have College Game Day come to town and not have a sold out stadium, especially after last week. Like, come on now.
Yeah, like, give IU some more respect. But yeah, no, College Game Day is going to be sick. And I think if IU is able to beat Washington with Taven Jackson, just their backup quarterback, I think that's going to give the committee a lot more, just like, I don't know, a lot more trust in IU, and I think they're going to move them up a lot more. It's kind of like a gambling scenario here. Like, you're kind of taking out your starting quarterback just to put in their backup for one game against maybe their hardest test of the season so far. So if they're able to do that and win, I think they're going to move up tremendously, but I don't think we'll be penalized as much since Rourke is hurt, and obviously he's just a game changer for IU after coming down from Ohio. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Taven Jackson does in the system, and the flashes that we got to saw from him against Nebraska, they were good. Like, he had he had that dot to Elijah Surratt in the back of the end zone. Like, just that was an incredible throw by him. So I think Indiana, they've kind of got a lot going for them, and hopefully Taven Jackson can kind of fill Rourke's spot for a week and just take over and keep that fire lit underneath them.
Yeah, I mean, I think just speaking on the flashes, because we have seen Taven Jackson play with IU before. I mean, now we're seeing him under a different coach. He's been sitting behind a elite quarterback. I think he's a Heisman candidate as of right now. So he's sitting behind him and learning from Rourke, like sitting on the bench. I mean, I think it definitely showed against Nebraska. I mean, you talked about like the dot that he threw to Surratt for the touchdown. That honestly was probably one of, if not my favorite play of that game. It was just such a beautiful throw, great placement, and then Surratt getting the ball and being able to turn it into a play. It was amazing. Hopefully we see more stuff like that this Saturday, because I don't want this to stop. I don't want this IU hype train to stop. This is what I came for. IU athletics. No, not really, but oh man. But yeah, that's going to be a very fun game to watch, and I'm probably going to be camping out for college game day. Cuz I mean, college game day, it's especially for IU, like this is kind of a like once in a blue moon type thing. So I'm definitely going to be wanting to try to be a part of that. So yeah, with that, we'll see you guys next week. Hopefully with IU being 8-0. I mean, it looks very likely, but knock on wood. But yeah, and hopefully maybe we get put into the top 10 with our victory against Washington. So yeah, see you guys all next week.